So I'll let you start off. I think do you want to do the formalities, anything like that? How shall we start it off? When you interview, say, any person, what would you do? Do you ask, because you need to find out, in this case, the person, I suppose, what his earlier life for, and then his formal education,
and the
you
background.
trace back, and you see how certain values started off, some are universal, and eventually, maybe, as you become more experienced in life, in other words, as you become older, you will actually, you will realize that certain things will always, you'll always be that same person, even though when you are like as 5, when you're 5, because you will have some innate characteristics about why the profession that you've chosen hopefully has become you, and you've become that person in a way. So then that is like a self-actualization. So a lot of us do go through that, and great architects, I'm sure, they all go through that, But the funny thing about architects, they got really, really colorful lives, because architecture really is, to me, between a bit of the empirical, the science part of it, and it's also a bit of your artistic value, how you combine it. So in the end, in this world, you will take that position, but depending on who you meet later on, sometimes you got to be a bit more like, when you're young, you're very idealistic, I want to do the creators and all that, but but as you mature in your profession, you say, okay, this client, don't bother, just give him this kind of architecture, no need to go to, so but in the end, the one thing I learned is that, that famous saying that we are actually jack of all trades and master of none. I think we have to evolve that saying in a way. We have to be jack of all trades still, but we have to become master of some and more slowly. But you must be the master of your craft. Whatever it is, I think I can ask you for sure that you can give me an answer. Then whether you talk about mechanical and all that, but a bit of, say, all this lighting and all that, you must know your stuff about architecture, so because that's your only modal, because that's your only attribute that you can, this is why I've chosen to become an architect. So I don't know, I didn't really prepare much, but I did some talk last time about this thing. Maybe I'll just show it to you. I can actually forward you this thing. It sort of encapsulates, I think, certain things about what architecture is. Okay, in fact, your emotions, your feelings and all that as a person, as an architect, you can actually go inside. And so I remember I just go there. It's 10:38 a.m. 12th October, I was preparing something. I was having my usual coffee bean. I was preparing the slides. So I said, oh, it's an architect. Because I wanted to share this with some students who are thinking of taking architecture. So this is what people say, architect, design, advisors, and all that sort of thing. And I said, okay, yes, but they definitely do much more. Buildings, okay, based on all based on what's actually okay, wait, sorry, trying to figure out. A short history of the world. I think you all did this, right?
Yeah.
He's supposedly credited to be an architect. And then I think the guys from that one of the Egyptian movies, I don't know what was it, and then fast forward a little bit, then you have this is a very important book. Accept the Modern Architecture. I'm sure you all know about this.
Yeah.
Unitas, Unitas, Formitas, utility, beauty, and functionality. That, if anything, is one of the theories and that's how space, light, and ventilation and all these whole things. Okay. 1400 years later, then you've got Michelangelo, and then you've got this guy in the Renaissance period, because as you know, Europe and the world at that time, but actually during the 7th and 8th century, the Islamic civilization flourished the most, so the concentration of the world was in there. So you should know all this so that you know how sort of things progress, but in the end, that is, I should put in the example because the geometry of the mathematics is very important. Architecture is about that science of drawing circle, the perfect circle, and everything, all that sort of theories. And that's our foundation. Modern architecture then was the next pivotal. We went through all those periods of social changes, Renaissance, and then suddenly Europe became more, all the feudal societies started to evolve into more democratic societies. People became to understand man's importance. Because during that part of the early, so, okay, you know who this is, of course. These are the greats, Walter Gropius, Mies van der Rohe, Corbusier, and in recent history, we have women architects are becoming very prominent. So for women, I've always seen a few of my friends, because it's not that architect is a very gender specific thing, but because your task, you've got to deal almost like command a whole gamut of people of different disciplines, and they're looking at you, so you've got to rise up to the occasion. And a lot of these women have become successful. They have become very strong characters. They go in a meeting and even sometimes stronger than the men. The men can be a bit more, they're very detailed, but that's all about gender, how the women architect and the men architect is different. So what we have in common, of course, creativity, passion, style, design, and all that sort of thing. Over here, you know about, you got to go to school and all that sort of thing, which we are doing. And this one was basically what architect does, to break and butter, the full service. But it's okay, the public will always see that you are just doing pretty pictures, but don't get, some people say, no, I'm not just doing pretty pictures like that, and then it depends how you take it. To me, well, yes, we do pretty pictures, but we actually do more than that. So, what is nice about being an architect, I think I begin to realize it, is the ability to be the jack of all this in a very good way. You actually develop your skill sets to be objective, because you're always being put in the position to mediate between things based on professionalism. You've got to work with the likes of the contractor who's trying to so-called cheat the client, and you also have got the developer, the client who always wants to take advantage of the whole thing. So you are becoming the so-called mediator of sorts. So you've got to rely on universal pure values, principles, and all that. That's why it's very important to be just and fair. You talk about contracts, when we go to the site and say, no, the client changed and put in the contract, all sorts of things will come up. But in the end, you have to value it for what it is. And hopefully you have already prepared for that too. So personally, okay, when I was younger, of course, I like to artistic. People listening, you can draw, you can become an architect. Yes, to a certain extent, yes, but it's the exposure and values. You look at yourself, both of you. I'm sure sometimes as an architect you feel that you're a bit different than other people. Sometimes maybe, yeah, it's not so bad. It's everybody goes through that. So so then what is it? So then you choose to become architecture, and the profession does validate you to become different. You can go in the office not wearing a normal tie, or you can go in the office with your hair one side, saying it's this sort of brand of architects. I'm really here. I mean, why should I look like anybody else? I want to show who am I, that sort of thing. The self-expression slowly becomes. But of course, some people show before the content. So, meaning that you should actually have enough to validate by your position. All great architects, like Frank Lloyd Wright, he comes with his hat and the black overalls with a stick. And the architects normally will go for blacks, like me today, I don't know why. But in terms of expression, I know that we learn content. I've always been fascinated, in school at least, when we learn about architecture history, we learn about the Bauhaus, the craft of making, and I hope that the education here also allows you to be a bit more connected, because we all come from an Asian society. We don't do the do-it-yourself kind of thing. You don't make something or sculpting. If you look at all these great architects, the sculptors, they have that feel of how things are made, being put together. And essentially, we are actually looked upon put things together. So when some people say yes, not sure, and all that. One of my favorite architects is actually Alba Aalto. I did my final year project. I wish I had gone to Helsinki, because I was doing this book about and it does bring you to a bit of socialism. And I find the Scandinavian architecture, they're more sensitive to things without being loud. They're more honest. They're about, the values is about preserving how to build within nature. And in fact, I remember my final year thesis was actually Museum of Modern Art in Helsinki. And what I wanted to show that at that time, I remember clearly, the Time always has the cover Man of the Year kind of thing. And that time, the Man of the Year was not a person, who was Mother Earth herself. So it was saying that before this whole movement of the green came about, we are now using our resources in very, everybody goes, I want to become rich and all that. So I felt as a student, you have all these so-called idealistic values and all that. So maybe, that sort of become more and more. I wanted to learn about the Scandinavian side, and I chose, and I like Alba Aalto as well. So I wanted to understand how the people are. In fact, one of my final year thesis mentor or professor that was telling me, Azmil, Finlandia Hall built in Helsinki, and that time it was 1960s or something. In 1980s, he said, it's all leather seats, and there's not even a scratch of, people just, treat the environment with such respect. And I think that was such a thing that I really could relate to. I wish that our society, like you talk about cleaning and all that, respecting the environment. You see in Taman, people just don't care. park, I don't care, and start throwing rubbish because I hate my. So I like the idea that a society can exist like that. So I was interested to find out about it. And I find generally a lot of the Scandinavian architects, even this guy, but his response to things are very different. So the newer generation, I sort of like the, and of course, Zaha did for being able to thrust women in architecture. And I guess if you look at this picture, her architecture is all about that seamlessness but really it's all about she brings and draws you in. Maybe it's a very feminine thing, where it's very sexy about it. It's very alluring. She does that to your senses. She started off very edgy. I remember, she had this, warmth view, so much of that energy, a bit like Lilith King now, because so you have to understand where each architect is coming from and whether you relate to it. So I can't remember what books, but all these architects, they all go through their own, and not necessarily all of them become practicing architects. Dr. Alan Tom, he's Sunrise. He's a developer. And then Tan Sri Chan Saulai, my ex-boss. He, if you will, he's very good. He used to be my boss. He could actually come in and sketch on a tissue paper, and then before the meeting, he had never heard about the project. He just asks all the right questions, how big, how much, and all that. He does the presentation. He sells it as though he did it, he worked on it. So that's that ability to do it. So I admired him from that. So I said, I should become maybe one day like him, And he has gone on to become a more successful commercially. He's built, developments that has got a bit of architectural slant to it. Not your normal, run-of-the-mill. He introduces a bit of that because he's an architect. So if an architect becomes developer, it's different. And then you look at architecture and Isadora Shah, I think that's his name. He is actually the founder of Four Seasons.
Okay.
He actually studied architecture. He studied architecture. So it means that the education of architecture, because it deals with the visual aesthetics and all that, but it also deals about bringing the environment. So Four Seasons was, and still is probably one of the benchmark in hospitality. How, so hey, that's on the good side. On the so-called reality of it, you will feel that sometimes you're not appreciated, you're under-recognized and all that. Fine, that's the world. It's never fair anyways. So, why is the engineer not head of this, say, Mr. Jaya, they all look at the Istana Negara, it looks as though it's been designed, all the entrance by an engineer. Because it's like a series of highways going into the Istana. I strongly believe it had been led by at least an architect in terms of that. They would have a different approach to it. So our world now, but we are actually considered in the Middle East as design engineers. So the realm of the architect and engineer is actually there's an overlap. But the difference is we all deal with the intangible. We deal with intangible values. What is your aesthetics? Is it you like animal print because inside of you have this desire, and you like the purity of black and white. You didn't go for, this colorful thing. Sometimes I believe in all this and the idea of less is more. I always also believe in singularity of expression if you can. If there's anything in anything that you do, if you can have at least, not to the point of Zen or anything, but there's something strong about the place in terms of the place, the way that you carry. Sometimes I wake up in the morning like those days, I have so many ties. What do I feel like, you know, sort of injecting in my presentation? Do I want to be a bit more playful? Do I want to be serious yet? So I choose things based on these values. So you actually develop certain things about yourself. So though, and then you could still going back. I always sometimes go back to Vitruvius, you know, the tree saying. We go back to who's that guy who wrote the Genus Loci, Sense of Place, that book. The search to Genus Loci, you know, the spirit of the place.
Oh, yeah.
That's the very important thing in architecture. I'm sure you all also heard the Fountainhead, that movie about architect and all that sort of thing. It's always been used as a reference to architecture as well. So all these will be the general things that people should have gone through. But you will find through your own persuasions and likes and dislike, discovery, that things sometimes you'll say, oh, it's like, why did I buy this thing? You go through that, fine. You evolve. I still go back, and then I still go back, and then I still go back to things about nature. I'm a bit more, not that I'm nature, that I would like to live in nature, but I appreciate people who have respect for the environment. And you know, and I'm trying to even inculcate that I'm not to waste myself. You know, what can I do first? Forget about other people. You cannot control all the other people around here. You can start with yourself. At least I do things like, okay, don't give me plastic bag. If I can carry, I'll carry. You know, that sort of thing. And then the green idea is really about designing good principles of design. And then that is basically things that we learn as a science, or some call it feng shui to a certain extent. Good orientation, don't have the, you know, all that. You just go back to basics in the end. So it's a cycle of things. Of course, now you have, you know, you go through every building and start looking about the same. There's nothing wrong with that. So in fact, some of my professors last time say, it's okay, you just do a good building. And the training architecture really is about the ability to see things micro. And then some people go down straight down to the little part, the screws and all that. You see the big thing, oh, this is a bunch of keys that will allow me access to many things. When you go to the micro detail of it, you know, you see this key, it's okay, you know, this or this key, that key. And I chose this thing, so I said, okay. It says the psychological thing. It's a light bulb, you know, actually. So it has, you can put layering of information. I think that's what some of the schools teaches the part that is not so literal. There's the AA does a lot of that very so that it develops your ideas in different ways in expression. Because sometimes over here you realize that people like to be literal. You know, our buildings, if you can, you know, like I was asking a friend of mine what he just gets to be. We all may laugh when, oh, this building, he said it's a boo-boo, this building is a curvace and all that. But sometimes society needs that. And if it's smart enough, I don't care, you can call it curvace, you can call it, like my ex-office architect, they did Tangkolo, all that. And next day, explanation of library to explain that it's an 8 year to a certain point. And sometimes you don't know when to stop. You know, you go on and design, but then you say, stop. You know, the worst thing is that architects never finish their own design. Especially their house, you know, it's like ongoing design or some sort of things. But we have to be smart. So really it's all about the balance. And again, you talk about all this balance, per me, is you are in the meeting, you always seem to be the party. You have a contractor say, no, the client said, no, that you have to control that. You have to understand what the client's so-called interests are. You have to understand where you have to act with the principle of just being fair and understanding that. And that's why it is very important to be that professional, more than just getting that. If you don't even have that, that paper, you will still want to act that way. The profession demands you, because if you cannot act any other way than being truthful to the situation, and then it comes into the practicality. So that's why people say those days there's a architect with a capital A. Some people say, pardon the expression, of God in the second print goes in, and then you have this type of architect that come in. You can sort of see how the different architects are. The older generation are very much like the hero worship those days. It brushes off to even the earlier people. Everybody goes in, I know kind of thing. I just attended this council meeting, and this architect said, so he's of that generation, so he has that. So now you have to be also relevant to your generation. You have to be a bit more sympathetic. So we have to evolve. Even for me, I have to understand what are the values now that is actually, what are you all basing on? We talk about sustainability, we talk about, and that somehow or other, even as we become, it becomes more challenging because you've got to incorporate more and more things. It's like never unending things. You've got to know all about this, you've got to know all about other things, you've got to know sometimes, but that's why we all jack of all trades. So the clarity and organization, you can almost break up. Architects, one thing we can do is that you can look at the big picture. You can tell, okay, conceptually, that one feels strong and that one is. But when you break up things, you know, this one is one part of it is this, another part of it is this, another part of it. You do the deciphering of information, situations, and all that. You break it up until you can find something that needs to be addressed. I have many things like between clients, because of a small thing, I'm not going to pay you the rest of the work, and then the contractor suffers. So you go and look, okay, Mr. Client, what is it really that you're not happy about? The Melayu saying lah, marahkan apa? Ni bakar kelambu or something like that. So you have to see architecture. So your skill is that you can isolate right down to the detail of what is really wrong or what's okay, agreed. This thing, let's take it out. This thing, this thing. But all these things are okay, right? Be fair. You let the contractor or whatever. This is okay. So that value, you will develop that value in many, many ways. When you deal with your structural engineer, suddenly you got to talk about the depth of the beam, and then maybe can you make it wider, and then can you not place it here, or can you transfer it, and then you learn a bit more, so let's do flat beam curve, why cannot? Because a lot of the other profession, especially I think here, because we are ruled so much by the commercialization, nobody wants to, even some architects, don't need to think so much, that just give the thing, don't go and try and change the world now. So you will then, with this particular engineer, but you have to sometimes invigorate yourself so that you don't become dulled by it. The minute that you fall into, you don't have any more excitement, you might as well then, I'll just take from that one and just give you. So you always constantly visit things, details. You revisit ideas, but you all go back to the same principle, the values of architecture, Vitruvius, whatever, Leonardo da Vinci. But I believe on my side now I got to actually go. One of the things that I want to do now is go into all these cultures. Like, say, for example, you look at the Japanese. The Japanese, if you really dissect everything, it's all about honor. When they do things, because of honor, they will do things with pride, and the next level is they like to have, them things, suddenly you have special thing for the eraser, very cutesy thing, and then, if you see their food presentation, also their bentos, all, that's the Japanese culture. And then you look at the French. The French is all about sophistication, and then they're very smoothly about things, But they're very learned because the age of enlightenment, the French Revolution, all the scientists, Voltaire, all the sociology came from that movement. Then and French was the international language, the scientific language after Latin, picked up from the classical times. And then they went on but suddenly rather somehow in the 19th century, English became the international language. So they got I think they're so upset, and some of their words are all coming from French anyways. But they've got that level of sophistication, and that smoothiness. And then you go to the Italians, they all got flair, but they're loud, and then they sometimes don't work like Italians. So you go to each culture, you dissect what is the culture for Malays. Actually, I think our culture is that culture of layering. We have a lot of layering. We always make sure that in the end, if I could cover that, I'll just pull the tirai and all the pasa, quickly like that. We always have that culture layering, and that is partly because we also have our belief in Islam and all that. So we always, cover, and there's a lot of. So that's our strength. So each society, cultures have got their strength, and US is all about selling. They don't really. They are very superficial to a certain extent. The ideas are all coming from Europe. If you remember, during the 1940s, the World War, all the greats, so-called, they moved to the US, and then they became professors of all schools in architecture. So they after Bauhaus and all that, they moved, and then Germany, of course, then. And the Germans are all about precision. Accuracy is number one. So you learn about each culture. So for me, is now dissecting from each society and culture is the best. Instead of looking for, every culture has got so-called attributes. So that attribute in the end can become your universal values and principles. And then you still get in touch with other architects, where they come from. There's some that you can relate to, some you disagree. It's okay. It's fine with them, but you are also discovering about yourself to a certain extent. I don't know, I've been talking too much maybe now, so you all can ask questions after that. I can just try and fill in what you all...
How about the basic foundation of this firm, like the background?
I joined ATSA in 2004. ATSA is made up of founders Azmil, Kaisa, and Mr. Yi, and there's actually another guy who left. They started off after the 80s. They all worked in URBANISM, and they decided that take that plunge and hey, let's take my part 3 and open up a firm. So their formative years was really from 1990s to maybe the end of the millennium. So then, you persevere. Started out, I think there was Tamatun somewhere, 3 of them, everyone was doing. So each of them had their own skill. Actually, I started to sketch, and then Mr. Yi is the Chinese businessman that
Yeah.
and there was another guy, I can't remember that guy's name, because the other day I had to do a bit of research on ATSA. ATSA has got, if you look at the logo, ATSA, it's actually it was modeled after the 4 rings, that's like Audi.
Oh, really?
So I said, hey, Mr. Yi, you should make Audi as our company car. So because it's all that, then the wording is all then derived from the geometry.
Oh, okay.
So because it was 4 friends who wanted to start a business, I think if you spin a story from it, you can sort of, these rings connect and all that sort of thing. So then, like most firms, I think I saw got the big break, part of it when we did the CIMB building, because it was a high rise, and it's always the intention of MU to get some so-called landmark building. What is interesting about that job is that the original designer was this guy called Azmil, who left us it's recorded, is it?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Nature of it. Not change drastically, but the brand, make it more, simplify it, because actually that represented me more. Of course, there are a few 1 or 2 details I want to mention, higher and all that sort of thing. So it can, so you do bring that part of it. So ATSA then, after that, 1992 they were formed. Now ATSA is a strength of about 75 to 80 people. So doing predominantly works that varied from institutional. We also do some special type building, but it all is driven by the partners. And I think one thing I have to give credit to Azmil, that he believes in keeping up and reinventing in terms of technology. Now we're going into BIM, building information modeling. We also going into much more detail in terms of green building technology. Not just we are working with a partner now that can do all the technical things like computer fluid dynamics, do all the simulation of air movement, flow, and all that, which sometimes I think certain institutions are doing. Then they offer as a service, but architects sometimes, we know this, but we don't have the time. So, for example, there's one job that was designed. On theory, you say, okay, hot air risers. We all know all these diagrams of hot air risers, but these days we need to go into empirical model. You need to prove it, either using software. You cannot go on just rely on that diagram, but because the translation on site, it's not just that diagram, it's how the thing works, your weather pattern, and whether you're, so the profession now requires you to become more empirical based, more scientific approach. So that's what green building to some extent. We already have this green building thing, GBI, LEED, we have green mark and all that, but we must make sure that as architects now, we must work with the right partners or within your office to go to the next level. We cannot afford to be, at least in Malaysia, because in other countries, depending on which, don't see the Westerners are always ahead in terms of they allow that time because of their culture of work and all that to come in. So you always marvel as though that they know so much more, but because they actually put in the extra time. And we are here in the so-called developing nation, rushing all the time, and then just take the diagram and just try to implement it. It's no longer because they're always at risk. So we had one client also recently now trying to do simple things about the phenomenon is you do a big roof over shopping malls and open air kind of thing. So we're doing a similar development. The client said he wanted to do spot cooling from on top. So the knowledge that you have now, okay, coal rises up. When you look at the airport also, they actually, for big buildings, they supply airs at a lower level. So first, you got to tell the client not to do it that way, because it's going to be a waste of money or something. Secondly, how do you convince it? You could either have to do some simulation based on the same concept. So again, architecture now, ATSA now, then is now going to that level as well. We have